That was Lyndon Johnson in 1964. You'll remember the dodge from Michael Dukakis in 1988 and Hillary Clinton's impressive dodge to say that she was a progressive in one of the debates. The point I want to make is that this is how our minds work. We activate networks, and we do it all the time in persuasion. There's nothing wrong with activating networks. If you couldn't have your networks activated, you couldn't think. And if you want to be persuasive with someone, to come back to the example that Nick gave us at the beginning, that was wonderfully persuasive language and intonation and visual imagery that FDR was activating in people's minds in that talk. And the line between what's propaganda and what's good persuasion is often a very difficult one to draw. There are lines that you can draw, but they're often difficult. I want to show you an example of the activation of networks that I think is one of the two most brilliant television ads ever produced, and this is Ronald Reagan's Morning in America.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
Now, why was that so powerful? It was so powerful because it activated multi-sensory, multimodal networks of association that were all congruent with one another. It activated gut-level feelings about family, about marriage, about the generations, about the treatment of older people, about the hopefulness of people. Note that ad is remembered as Morning in America. But the first line is not, it's morning in America, it's morning again in America. It actually has an implicit negative tone to it that runs throughout. He doesn't say we're proud, we're strong, we're good. The announcer says prouder, stronger, better. Prouder, stronger, and better than what? Prouder, stronger, and better than the dark nights of Carter Mondale. But the important thing about this is that's a network that he was activating along with this positive network. This is as feel-good an ad as you can get, but he's making sure that he's making the comparison. I don't consider that illegitimate at all. I think that's simply a brilliant use of activating multiple networks at the same time that establishes what's good about you while trying to establish, we weren't so proud, and we weren't so strong, and we weren't so good before. To wrap up, I want to give you an example of do I have time for one nefarious example? I want to give you an example of where I think the activation of networks is, in fact, unethical, and that is in the term support the troops, or support our troops. The reason why that is a problematic frame in George's language, in context in Frank's language, and you'll see my language about networks, we're getting at the same thing, is that it's essentially eliding two different networks that have nothing to do with each other, just as the war on terror allowed George Bush to elide the war on bin Laden and the war in Iraq, which incidentally, we have won neither of those. But the war on terror was a very powerful way of framing it. What Support the Troops does is elides a network about supporting our men and women in uniform, on the one hand, and deploying them to Iraq and keeping them in Iraq. Those things have no logical relation to each other whatsoever, but it has caught the Democrats over and over and over for their fear of being branded, that if we step out and say, I believe that it's time for a responsible withdrawal, or whatever they say, and they actually back it up with a vote, that they'll be accused of not supporting our troops. And to conclude with a comment that gets to the kind of thing that George is talking about, how do you answer something like this? How do you not repeatedly capitulate in advance? You need to, as George is describing, you either need to be activating an alternative set of networks with a very powerful story behind it, or you need to connect this with something else. And just to give you an example of that, suppose the Democrats had said something like this. They could have done this as early as 2003, but certainly it should have happened in the 2004 election. It could certainly happen now. and it's something like this. Mr. President, you want to know what it means to support our troops? Don't make their families take up a collection for their body armor. You want to know what it means to support our troops? Armor their Humvees so they don't lose their lives and limbs when they don't need to. Do you want to know what it means to support our troops? Don't send them into somebody else's civil war. You want to know what it means to support our troops? Don't send them to war unless you would send your own children. You want to know what it means to support our troops? When they come home damaged, when they come home with their bodies frayed from that war, don't you dare warehouse them with cockroaches in Walter Reed Hospital. You want to know what it means to support our troops? When they come back to the shores that they will never see again, having given their life for this country, don't whisk their bodies in the middle of the night because it's good for PR for people not to see their bodies. You proudly display their flag-draped coffins like every American president has done in American history before you. You want to know what it means to support our troops? Don't you ever write letters to their parents, to their spouses, to their children when they've lost their lives for this country with a mechanical pen. You write it with your own hand so you feel what it means when they've lost their lives for this country. And you really want to know what it means to support our troops. Bring them home.
Thanks, everybody. We have about 20 minutes, and I'll ask the panelists questions for about 10 and have audience questions for about 10. So we'll have to go, I wish we could spend 3 hours, but this is wonderful material, but let's just go quickly. First of all, Frank.
No, don't go to me.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
I want to touch you again.
There's a thought I thought you didn't finish. You were saying President Bush isn't a good communicator. I thought there was a but coming. Why did he win twice? And how does his rhetoric work? And how does it work through his very large swings to super popularity, super unpopularity?
Bush won partially because John Kerry lost. If he'd used your rhetoric, your language, I hate calling it rhetoric because that demeans it. That kid in Florida that you heard about that was at one of these kind of speeches and he was heckling Kerry and they tasered him. Remember, he said, "Don't taser me, man." He was the first person ever to be electrified from a John Kerry speech.
So don't you think, Mike Gerson...
I have so many more of those, but because that guy's heckling me over there...
Don't you think Mike Gerson is a genius? War on terror is a brilliant phrase?
No. War on terror is an awful phrase because the president used it exactly as you said to apply the issue of terror to the issue of Iraq, and now he has blurred both. And so the public's response is it is confused, it is angry, and that's one of the reasons why the support for the war is opposed. You cannot, evildoers, who created such a phrase like that? And that tells you how badly the Democrats have done, because the Republicans haven't done well in terms of communication. But the problem now is the MoveOn.org ad, the one that was in the newspaper, the full-page ad against General Petraeus. At the moment when the public was really turning against the war, and General Petraeus was brought before Congress and had to explain what had happened, instead of a discussion about the people who've been killed and the situation, what happened with the debate? It got moved, shifted to whether that ad itself was wrong or not. Here's the point for people in this room, because I know you all oppose the war. That ad was great for MoveOn.org. That ad raised hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and email support for the ad and for the organization. So doesn't now you can save a little bit of money. You won the battle, but you lost the communication war. Instead of focusing on all the things that had happened, it shifted it to the ad. And if I were an activist Democrat, I would have been livid. Because now it continues for another 6 months.
George, I'm going to override for a minute. I want to throw out, because time is passing so quickly, two very big questions and ask all of you, and you can go first, to sort of jump in on either or both of these. One, I didn't hear a lot of support on this panel for the George Orwell position that if we can have a sort of plain-spoken, honest, reality-based political language, everything will be fine. So first question is, what's okay and what's not okay? At the end, Drew, you pointed out something you don't think is okay. Is there a principle you can state on kind of an ethics of political communication? That's the first question. Second question.